My name is Jermaine Ross-Allam, and I direct the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms at the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I tend to migrate where the microphone is concerned, and so I'll try not to do that. So this afternoon, I want to talk to us about repair and reparations, and I want to especially lean into what it is about both repair and reparation. Thank you. And I want to lean into what it is that makes repair and reparation not only Christian business, but a distinctly U.S. American Protestant business. Unfortunately, this is the short presentation, so we don't get into all of those details, so I'll move at a pretty clipped pace and leave some time we have time for questions and answers, right? Okay, because I think you might have some questions, and hopefully I'll have some answers. So let us begin. So the Center for the Repair of Historic Harm is a brand new initiative that the General Assembly said must exist, and I was very happy when I heard that they said it must exist, and something stirred in me to say, well, you might want to consider being a part of what must exist. Because this is a work that's very close to my heart. It's also very close to my academic work, and it has become a joy for me to be able to finally tell people who said, you're going to have to choose the pulpit or the seminary lectern. And I always thought, well, I'm not so sure that choice is all necessary. And so what we're going to talk about now is what the Center for Repair considers to be very important in our life as a church right now, which is, as you can see on the screen, growing the number of human beings working to share the good news that repair and reparations make common sense for the common good, and we seek to do that as soon as possible and to be working at it for as long as it takes. When I say that reparations and repair make common sense for the common good, I am directly trying to oppose the untrue idea that reparation is somehow nothing more than an impractical gripe that comes from people who cannot simply get over crying over the spilled milk of the past about which nothing can be done. Instead, from multiple angles, it is absolutely common sense that when a nation has the sort of economic and transgenerational problems that we have in our nation as a result of an emancipation without compensation to the victims, that means that we have economic problems that rise to the level of national security problems for those who need those terms in order to take the problem seriously. So it is common sense to look at a major percentage of the people in our nation who need their situation remedied, not because people do not work hard, but because only some people in this country have been set up in such a way that their hard work will amount to transgenerational wealth. Common sense for the common good. And I emphasize that it is good news. So, what are reparations? And before I do this part, I want to clarify what we will discuss is the difference between repair with a capital R and, reparations with a capital R and why am I stumbling on my words now? Okay. Two different things, one distinction. Reparations with a capital R and repair. We're going to talk about why these things are different and why it's important for those of us who are Protestant Christians to get that distinction right. And I'll try to make sure to get my own terms right. All right. So the United Nations Commission on Human Rights acknowledges 5 forms of reparations: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and the one that I think is the least understood but very important, guarantees of non-repetition. So again, restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, and satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. Reparations is an act or a series of acts of a nation state or states in response to a call. Repair, on the other hand, is the work of the people. And we'll say a little bit more about these in just a moment. And repair, which is not reparations, but repair must prepare the nation and the people, that is, to inspire the nation and its leaders to make reparations. Now, if you see, I put a little golden box, you probably can't see it from where you are, around the word inspire. As Christian people, this word inspire should mean something to us because we understand that the very breath of God is in us. And because the very breath of God is in us and not just some empty wind, we hold ourselves responsible for doing things that we couldn't possibly expect of other creatures. But not everyone who is human is already inspired. And so God gives us the work of helping to inspire other human beings so that they can be inspired to do what the world needs them to do so that what is right and what is necessary becomes what is possible. How can we talk about inspiration without thinking about the 44th president of the United States, whose name I have once again managed to misspell? Thought I got that. But Barack Hussein Obama, whose first name I have been informed very recently has a C in it. And as we can see from this picture, that I'm sure Obama had no idea that something like a halo seems to be appearing behind his head. Obama was not the kind of president who would have thought about a symbol like that, making him seem to be a larger than life, highly inspired character. But that image reminds me that the 44th president of the United States, who inspired many of us, was not himself inspired to make reparations a part of his presidential campaign. And in the less than inspiring podcast that the former president once did with Bruce Springsteen asked the president, and I feel like that question was planned in advance, although I don't think it did much to help the former president. But the question was asked, since you seem to understand systemic racism, et cetera, why during your presidency did you not make reparations a key issue? And the former president said that the politics of white resistance and resentment, the talk of welfare queens and the undeserving poor, made reparations not only a non-starter, but potentially counterproductive in my presidency. So when I say the work of repair, as opposed to reparations, is the work of the people by which the people will inspire our leaders, what that means is that we have to realize that however you take what the president says, he's talking about us. We are the ones who he felt certain did not take reparations seriously enough for it to be a politically clever thing for him to advocate during his time in office. And so the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms understands that if that is a fact, that falls short of the truth with a capital T, but if it's a fact that the people were not at that time ready, then the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms is taking it upon itself and is bringing it to the church to make sure that the next time the right leader is in place, they will understand that it will be very difficult to do a whole range of other things that may not be essential if, in fact, they do not deal with the groundswell of human beings requiring repair and reparations to be taken seriously. Professor William Darity, Duke economist, says that reparations must be community specific, meaning no calls for reparations on the generic basis of being exposed to white supremacy in general. They must be community specific, and they must serve to permanently close what he refers to as the racial wealth gap, which is the simple fact that economic prospects in the United States still match the pattern that is directly associated with race ideology and the practice of racial slavery and Native American genocide. Success and failure economic prospects according to the numbers, not according to the capacity of the human spirit, but according to the numbers. Economic prospects are still shaped by the pattern established with racial slavery, Indian removal, and biological genocide. And he also believes that reparations, if done correctly, will bring closure, after which there is no more demand for any other economic or legislative activity related directly to the legacies of, in this case, chattel slavery and Jim Crow and other forms of sequestration from 14th Amendment of protections. Reparations in the case of indigenous nations of the United States, it is very important to understand that sometimes indigenous nations do refer to reparations when they are talking about what is necessary to make the relationship right between indigenous nations and the rest of the United States of America. However, indigenous leaders are very clear to say that the term and the concept reparation does not fully represent the interests of indigenous nations. And so what we mean when we say reparations is somewhat with an asterisk, meaning we understand that it is not a one size fits all, but that each individual circumstance of each people group, each ethnic group, and each nation must be taken into consideration. And in the case of the indigenous nations that live in what we now call the United States, part of what is required to make relationships right is recognition as sovereign nations, not minorities, not ethnic groups, not minoritized people, not races, but recognition as sovereign nations, and also local and state and federal sovereignty in both criminal and civil matters. There's more to be said about reparations, but you'll have to sign up for the long class. What is repair? I define repair, which is very, very broad, and the breadth is necessary. I define repair in part as being transformed from who we have become to who we must be. Being transformed from who we have become to who we must be. Callie House is a person whose situation helps us understand why it is that we must be transformed away from what we have become. Callie House was an Afro-American woman who has now become known as the mother of reparations because she established an ex-pension society aimed at making sure that the government had record that Afro-American men who were emancipated without compensation had demanded reparation early in the process, immediately following emancipation. And it's also very important to understand that just like us this afternoon, we're sitting in a church and we're talking about reparations. And some of you may still be wondering, how is this Christian? Callie House was a churchwoman. She was a primitive Baptist, and she began her organizing work in the primitive Baptist church in a congregation much like this one. So we are not doing something beyond the pale or beside the point of the gospel. We are resuming that which has always been the business of Protestant people in the United States, because we have to repair the damage of what was not in this land before Protestants brought a wide range of unique problems to this land, on top of other problems that were already here. Callie House, for her work as a person advocating for dignity in old age for people who had worked for free, she was ignored by the African-American business and professional class who were focused on integration and thought her work was counterproductive and seeking a backlash. She was harassed and she was surveilled by local and federal agents. She was pilloried in Atlanta and Nashville newspapers by a few different people, but especially she was the victim of inflammatory invective by a local judge who played a role in eventually throwing her in jail, running her through a sham trial in order to destroy the reparation movement. And the reason why they were able to do it so easily is because they could rest assured that the US government at that time was so far in that public opinion, was so far away from taking repair and reparation seriously that nobody with any power to do anything to help Callie House would care enough about what she was proposing. They considered the idea of repayment for people's stolen labor so ridiculous that no one would even think twice if we said she was simply guilty of mail fraud because she was using the postal service to help sign people up to register their demand for pensions. The name of the organization that Callie House founded is called the Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association, and it all right, I've got to back up if I need it. The Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association, and it was founded in 1898. She founded it together with Isaiah Dickerson, who was a lawyer, and she was a lecturer, this is Callie House, that is, a lecturer and an organizer, and was always a faithful churchgoer. A book that tells her story in a brilliant and accessible way is this book that you see here, My Face is Black is True, and it is written by lawyer and historian Mary Frances Berry. And it is an excellent book, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to get an understanding of what the social environment was, and what the state of public opinion was, and what the state of religious opinion was, such that it was so easy to throw this woman away who was doing absolutely nothing wrong, except standing up for the dignity of people who had worked for free to be able to go into the last years of their life with some dignity. Repair is a local action, and it is important to realize that the local action of repair is important, but it cannot and will never add up to what reparation with a capital R must accomplish. Which is to say, no matter how many checks with X number of zeros behind it that people in California want to write for various reasons, that will not do the work that needs to be done, which is, at the very least, in the case of the Afro-American people of the United States, close the racial wealth gap permanently. Cannot do it on the local level, but local action is very important, and we'll say why that is in just a moment. But some examples of local action come from Evanston, Illinois. Evanston, Illinois was one of the first municipalities in the nation they were the very first municipality in the nation to legislate what they refer to as reparations for the effect of redlining on local citizens. So they looked at how regulations around this invented concept called race was used to make sure that African Americans, even when they managed to purchase property, would have their property devalued in such a way that they could not, even though they worked equally and saved equally, could not pass wealth on equally to their descendants. They were able to prove that this took place, which was not hard. They were able to prove what the effect was on the African American community, which was a little harder, but not so hard. But one of the things that they do still, and what they did that inspires me, which I think is very, very possible and very difficult, is that they were able to gather together a cooperating coalition of different Protestant faiths and even a synagogue. And together they were able to stay in their own lanes as they did collaborative work together and convince one another that at the very deepest roots of their religion, reparation in the place where they lived was a religious duty. Specifically, I was impressed to figure out that president of a synagogue and others were able to dig into the deep roots of Jewish theology and religion by using Torah and Mishnah and Talmud and the different writings within those traditions in order to show Jewish people who, I'm told, only came to that synagogue for religion only and none of that political activism stuff. They were able to use the very theological heritage of their own tradition to draw the conclusion that supporting reparations for Afro-Americans in Evanston, Illinois, was in fact a Jewish responsibility. Not my words, their words. So this is the type of repair that is necessary not only in one city, not only in one community, but this is the kind of theological and imaginative repair that is necessary and is possible when we get serious about being the people within whom God's very breath resides. Then it becomes very clear that we must and that we can be transformed because God has made us to be people who are receptive to the possibility of being transformed. Princeton and Columbia theological seminaries and other entities who understand what everybody has known all along, that they have been enriched in part by chattel slavery and other relations to race ideology, are also looking at ways that they can do something to make right in part what has been made wrong. We also have individuals in local areas like Rosewood here in Florida, and also people who are responding to the Greenwood massacre in Oklahoma, continue to seek compensation for what is on the historical record as just wanton disrespect, destruction, murder, and mayhem against entire communities of people. This involves citizens, this involved National Guard, this involved aerial bombings in certain cases, but very little, if any, mention from the federal government, of course, until much, much, much later. Other examples of local repair action, of course, come from Lansing Presbyterian Church in Michigan. They have a group called the Justice League, who I've been very, very happy to work with and to meet and to maintain a relationship with. They're working for repair and reparation on a local level, and they're doing it through the church by making the Presbyterians' official apology to other churches and engaging in other activities that let people know that the Presbyterian Church is no longer in the business of just saying words while holding on to the loop, so to speak. It is becoming important, and people are doing the work, especially our friends in Lansing, to let people know that apology and reparation and the Christian gospel simply go together, given our history together in this nation. And also, and I'll say more about this later, but the Presbyterian Mission Agency Center for Repair is also engaging in work that is both related to reparations on a larger level and also helping churches engage in acts of repair that will help us change our relationships to one another within our churches and within the churches in our presbyteries and around the world. So this is very important work, and I'll be letting all of you know more and more as the months go by how you can become a part of it. I will especially be eager to let you know, as soon as I can sit down long enough to write a charter, how you can become a part of the up-and-coming international and ecumenical alliance for repair and reparations, which will simply use the networks that we already have available to us and that we have been expanding for a long time in the Presbyterian Church to engage in what I refer to as a call and response repair ethic. And I'll say more about that in a moment, but a call and response repair ethic acknowledges that although the Presbyterian Church knows what the Presbyterian Church has been and has not been up to, it is not the job of the Presbyterian Church to tell other people what must be repaired, but it is the job of the Presbyterian Church USA to listen for what repairs people call for and to respond in a faithful way as equals. When we think of theology, when we think of words, for example, from John Calvin, who let us know that our knowledge of ourselves and our knowledge of God is so intertwined that we might be forgiven if we imagine that they are the same thing. From that perspective, it becomes extraordinarily necessary for us to understand what repair requires, which is self-evaluation and environmental transformation. And when I say self-evaluation, I'm talking both about those who must make the repairs and those who have it as their duty to call for the repairs. Ours is a tradition where we are constantly tempted to make an artificial distinction between so-called that world and so-called this world. Although in our tradition as Reformed people, we have constantly referred to the sovereignty of God as if that means there is no line that divides God's jurisdiction with some other place. But when it comes time to talk about or to not talk about reparations, sometimes that line threatens to reappear and lodge itself right at about the place where we think we might have some responsibilities to look in our side view mirror, ask what happened, and begin negotiating repairs that lead us to genuinely be able to love one another. And on the other side, if you will, of that equation, many of us have experienced Christianity in such a way that we know very, very well what it takes for us materially to live a good life. And we see what other people have been able to accumulate and conserve, while others of us, because of all the reasons we've discussed, have not been able to accumulate or conserve even that which we have been able to earn across generations. And there is the experience of Christianity that makes people who have it as their duty to call for repair and reparation reluctant to do so, because they are afraid to appear, as Obama has said, as some others have said, as ungrateful people, or as unpatriotic people, as angry people, or as resentful people, or as bad Christians. So when I say that repair requires transformation and self-evaluation, what I mean is that we have to ask ourselves whether we are a part of a group who is due reparation or whether we are part of a group who must make reparation. We have to ask ourselves, what do we declare about God if we deny that reparations are right, necessary, and possible, especially those of us who have known the facts and understand the circumstance? We declare something, whether we say it out loud or not, about God, if we deny, despite what we know, that reparations are right, necessary, and possible. And we also say something else about specific human beings. We say something particular about Black folk. We say something particular about indigenous nations and others, like the people of Haiti, for example, when we deny that reparations are right, necessary, and possible. And so we have to be spiritually honest with ourselves. And I always find that when I need to be very spiritually honest with myself, I also have to be grammatically correct. Meaning, I have to tell myself the answer to certain questions, or I have to tell myself what I really think in a sentence with a period. So I can be very clear that I know the difference between a feeling and my actual convictions. And again, you declare something, and I declare something about myself and about yourself, if knowing facts and having eyes to see, if I decide for whatever reason it's not worth it to me, it's not advantageous for me to say that reparation is right, necessary, and possible to Christian people, something is going on. And I need to just be able to tell myself. Maybe I would have to say something like, well, you've worked really hard and you deserve all the success that you could get. Don't do anything that's counterproductive because you're special. If I say that to myself and I say it in a complete sentence and put a period on it, it sounds kind of strange, because I don't really believe it. But sometimes I'm tempted, as other people are tempted, to not look at the difficult problems that everybody says is impossible, or to not look at the unpopular things that inspiring presidents ignore and somehow try to make ourselves exempt from it because it's inconvenient. But if we are faithful to our God and not someone else's God, but the God that we know in Christ, we have to have, excuse the phrase, but a come to Jesus moment and tell the truth and really ask ourselves, who do I think I am? Such that others should not inherit their ancestral wealth, but I get to. I can't answer that question for you. I mean, I do in my head, but not a polite thing to do. But theologically, we need to really ask ourselves these questions and then draw the conclusion that, maybe I'm not a Christian after all, and I'm just a religious opportunist. And I don't care about other people unless it makes me look good and feel good. Or maybe we can have a chance to be born again as a sibling of other human beings and realize that, my goodness, terrible things have happened. And I think I need to be a good brother or a good sister, a good sibling, and figure out how to make it right, even if I look silly in the process. But that's a private matter with public ramifications. So what has the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms been up to, and what's coming up next? Well, so far, the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms is me. But very, very soon, we'll be taking on some extra employees. I'm very excited about that because the work has been picking up very, very quickly. And I made the blessed mistake of saying in public, email me with any questions that you might possibly have, and let me know if I can come out to your presbytery, and I will be there and let you know what the center is up to. And people did. And people did, and people did, and people did. And I realized all of a sudden I need help. And so thanks be unto God, help is on the way, and the Center for Repair is expanding so that we can respond more quickly and more efficiently to the many, many questions that are coming to us every day and every afternoon from congregations and presbyteries and entities outside the Presbyterian Church who really want to know, what are you all up to and how can we become a part of what you are doing? And so what is coming up next, as I said earlier, we will be establishing an ecumenical, and I don't know the name yet because I'm working on it, but you can see that I'm working on an acronym that you can pronounce. So it'll be International Ecumenical Repair and Reparations Alliance. And I'm going to put something in the front, maybe Cali House. So it'll be Chiera or something that kind of just rings a bell. But the purpose of that will be to organize a group of people around the world using the PCUSA's network so that we can engage in our call and response repair ethic. Indigenous nations and Afro-Americans, most people know who know anything about reparations, what is required from Afro-Americans and Indigenous nations in terms of repair and reparation. It is not clear what that means for Presbyterians who are from Southern Africa, for example, or who are from Puerto Rico. It's not clear what that means for Korean Americans who are Presbyterians. And it is not the job of the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms to tell anybody what their reparation is and to come over here so that we can serve you. We are, hopefully, a democratic organization that understands the necessity of operating not in a sense of noblesse oblige, not out of a sense of patronization, but as a group of equals who understand the need to tell the truth about what has been done so that we can organize ourselves by all available means to do what is right, necessary, and possible, and move into a future where we no longer have to talk about these kinds of reparations ever again. And so our Ecumenical and International Repair and Reparations Alliance will be focused on not only listening to these calls, but equipping one another in multiple ways, sharing news, using our communications outlets, and also just sharing best practices. For example, later this summer and also in the fall, the Center for Repair is going to be taking an interagency delegation to Juneau, Alaska, in order to fulfill another General Assembly mandate. The General Assembly mandate is to simply offer reparations and an official apology to the Tlingit community in Juneau, Alaska, whose church was closed in a very cynically anti-racist way, which is to say, a church that was set up as a segregated church once upon a time served the interests of certain people by being segregated. And when it no longer served those interests by being segregated, then it needed to serve the interests of whites by becoming an integrated community. And this process was done in such an ugly and unfortunate way that the community has been damaged in ways that we simply will not understand until we make our first trip to Juneau, Alaska, later in late summer, early fall, and we will go through a very intense one-week process as a delegation. And we will learn exactly what it has cost that community to have been subject to the various forms of racism. And we will have a month after that to then return to Juneau and then offer monetary reparation and the official PCUSA apology as a result of all that is done and as a result of the process. Also, as we engage in this process, I don't particularly want to be in this process all by my lonesome. So I'm working with our communications ministry to find a way to make sure that all of you can be a part of this process in as close to real time as possible in the form of videos, testimonies, and blogs as it is appropriate according to the Tlingit community. So that by understanding these processes, we come to realize that, first of all, repair and reparation is necessary, but it's not the end of the world. In fact, we hope to do it in such a way that produces new models that show that this is the beginning, not of endless reparations forever and ever, but the beginning of right relationships that begin with admitting what has been done wrong and doing what is required to make it right. And so the Center for the Repair of Historic Harm is deeply invested in engaging in these processes in such a way that we honor the communities who are due reparations, but so that we also honor the communities that are due reparations by engaging in the process in such a way that people will see joy and new possibilities in the process, so that more and more people will be drawn and attracted to doing what is right, necessary, and possible, in part because they will have witnessed the fact that Christian people have done it, and it seems to not have killed them. I actually wrote that down. So reparations and repair for what? There's so many different things. So how does the PCUSA determine or understand or organize where to start and where to go? That's an important question. And that has taken quite a bit of time to think about. And very soon I will be publishing, and I'll make sure that you get access to it, a document called, I'm not sure what I'll call it, but the working title right now is Crossing the 7 Stations of Repair. And well, I wrote that down, so I'll just tell you what I wrote. I'll take you through this briefly so that we can have time for conversation. And by the way, if you've noticed in the background, I have some artwork that has a lot of squiggly lines. And these are examples of an art form known as kintsugi. And it's a Japanese art form that many of you have probably heard of, but I don't know if it's ancient, but it's a Japanese art form that repairs broken pottery and other things that are broken by making an adhesive of many different materials, and in some cases, gold. And that gold is used to put the pieces of a broken cup or a broken vase back together, so that the act of repair is not simply how to make use of something because you're too cheap to throw it away, but to make the act of repair something creative and something beautiful that tells a story and gives a new and more valuable life to something that others might have just counted as all but lost. And so I'm not an expert, obviously, in that art form, but I just like to keep images of it around me and when I make presentations, so that it can help me remember that when we talk about repair, it has negativity and doom and gloom and even some anger in it, but ultimately it is about creativity after the pattern of our Creator, who has given us what we need to make something new, even out of ancestral nonsense. The 7 stations of repair will be representations. In the first iteration, it'll be representations in writing. Later, it will be 3-dimensional representations in art, in sound, even in dance, and in many other forms. And if that type of thing is interesting to you, be in touch. Because we're always looking for creative people who like to do creative things that help people take information and experiences in. But they will be representations of historic harms inflicted in an attempt to transform the land now called the United States of America into the fantasy of a white man's country. I know it might be hard to believe, but once upon a time, somebody really, really thought that you could just transfer populations from one continent to the other, and push people into the ocean, and it was supposed to just all be dandy and a part of the providence of God, which we can see will not work. And the damage that has been done in the process of believing in that fantasy and pursuing it must be repaired. The stations of repair will be representations of those things that must be repaired. They will also remind the Center for Repair of the historic communities and repairs that the PCUSA must prioritize. I won't go through all the stations, but I'll just give you a little glance at a few. The first station will deal with the biological and cultural genocide of indigenous nations and the theft and defilement of the lands under their care. The second station will deal with hereditary enslavement of African descended people in the United States and exclusion of Afro-Americans from access to 14th Amendment protections. Again, we focus initially on Afro-Americans and indigenous nations because geographically and chronologically, these are repairs that the PCUSA must prioritize, but these are not limited. The third station deals with the invention and the imposition and the enforcement of arbitrary norms of gender and sexuality, especially in order to populate and to finance a white man's country. There's a lot more colorful language that we can fill into, but I just wanted you to be able to get a broad sense that there have been inventions of arbitrary norms focused on biologically and ideologically reproducing a white man's country that mechanize and instrumentalize the sexualities of men, women, and children of multiple ethnicities. Skipping ahead, the seventh station will deal with the systemic distortion of the gospel around the planet in support of US American imperial projects and the distortion of the gospel produced in order to suppress resistance to colonization, chattel slavery and wage slavery, and the sequestration of women's bodies. We don't have to think too far to imagine and to remember how from Sunday school to confirmation, all the way through even to ordination, theology has been used to do all of these things. And in order for us to repair, we have to engage these things one at a time, as soon as possible and for as long as it takes. I had to throw this in because I just like symbols. But the infinity station has to do with the ongoing production of new possibilities through faithful and practical humane patterns of sustainable creation and routine repair, which simply means anyone who has ever owned a home, raised a child, or invented a new machine realizes that you always have to take repair seriously as a matter of course. Many industries around the world are learning this much more quickly than the Protestant church. And our theologies need to be repaired. Our relationships need to be repaired. We need to ask ourselves and we need to ask our neighbors about what has gone on and what can be done now so that our relationships going into the future can be repaired. Even all the way down to talking about the Apostle Paul and Peter and Augustine and all of our wonderful theologians, Luther and John Calvin and all the rest. None of them are perfect. They have led us in wonderful directions, and we have been, or I can say, allowed ourselves to be misled by them at the same time. All of these things, as Protestants, as Reformed people, have to be the points along which we are always being reformed. The 7 stations of repair do the following. They identify intersections in religious, social, economic, and spiritual and political life where Presbyterians have participated in harming human beings and nature and have opportunities to help repair the harm done. They will also provide a structure that identifies opportunities to resume responsibility for historic and ongoing harms. They will also further indicate communities committees, and stakeholders with whom the Center for Repair will negotiate diverse forms of activities and targeted solidarities. Specifically, what this means is that even though the Center for Repair has a very specific focus, I think about Robert Frost's poem called The Mending Wall, where he says, good fences make good neighbors, which means you don't have to pretend that you are concerned equally in your work with 100 different social justice issues. It's not only untrue, it's a little bit obnoxious, because then it makes other people try to one-up you on the same thing. The Center for Repair organizes these stations so that we can always be very clear, this is what we're focused on, and this what seems to appear from our periphery, knowing that other people will have as their center the very things that we acknowledge are on our periphery. And so since good fences make good neighbors, that means that we will always have opportunities, no matter what ministry that we're engaged in, to collaborate in ways that make sense with all kinds of ministries without ever needing to try to compete to say, oh, this is the new thing, or this is the most important thing, you need to move back and take your place. That happens too much in our world, and it happens too much in our social justice circles, and that needs to be addressed. And this is an important thing for the church to do. The church has an opportunity to bring some, I don't know how to say this, but some maturity to a lot of new enthusiasm about multiple intersections that do need our attention. Sometimes we are counterproductive in the way that we go about doing things that do need to be done. The church has a long history and a long memory, and the church, I think, has a lot to offer many of our groups outside the church and in other circles by helping people understand that there's no need to be self-righteous about who you think that you are because you read the latest 5 books and you went to an expensive college that's getting more and more expensive and less practical. We all live right here in this country. I'm assuming that many of us do. We all have inherited some useless, harmful, and futile things from our ancestors. And some of us who have been hurt the most are so traumatized by our experience of historic harms that we are not even good at the moment at being part of our own liberation. So part of what we emphasize at the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms is that it is very important to pay attention to a division of labor, which means it's okay if you don't like the work of repair and reparation. It's okay if you're not good at it. Or it's okay if you have questions that you think are silly. And it's okay if you have questions that you don't even know how to form the right words, because the Center for Repair is a workspace. It's not an elite space for all the cool kids who know all the right words, who are extremely eager to point out who has the least number of intersectionality points so that you can be pointed out as the eternal oppressor, or the opposite, so that you can turn into the eternal blessed victim. This is not practical. We do not operate that way. Everyone who has a skill set that offers something useful for repairing the wide range of damages that we address is very, very welcome to contribute those gifts. And we will constantly work to cultivate an atmosphere where everyone who has something valuable to offer repair and reparation will feel increasingly more and more comfortable doing the work for as long as it takes. That means you want me to be done. All right, 5 minutes. We have 5 minutes for Q&A? Okay. So then, let's just be done with my part. Know that if you can see it, this is my email address. I'm not as quick at email as I was the second week of my work, but I still would encourage you all, if you have questions about how to become a part of the work of repair, and if you just want to keep in touch, we will have a mailing list and a newsletter and all that stuff. So just email me and I will make note of your email and I will be in touch. But questions and answers. Thank you, timekeeper. Thank you.
Brother, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Mario Bolivar. I'm the pastor of the Presbyterian Church in Eustis. I don't know if I understood correctly or not. Once you mentioned Latino Hispanics in your conversation. And also once you mentioned Asian of our part of our brothers and sisters. I was born and raised in Colombia, so this is not even about me being from Puerto Rico. But is your center working at all with Latino Hispanics who are currently, some people might call it a Commonwealth of the United States, who are continue to be in this? Is this part of the work that you're doing, or is that not in your peripheral work now?
Are you calling for something?
I am calling because I'm hearing you doing a lot of good work for African American communities. And I see some work being done happening for indigenous community. However, I did not hear in your address anything for Latino or Hispanics within the United States, within the PCUSA, and it's increasingly happening. If you pay attention to the PBS things that they are releasing now, you will see how Latinos and Hispanics are almost not existent in this that they created. Actually, Next Church just released a whole new 9-people board of people to set the vision for what Next Church is going to be. And there is a lot of representation except Latino or Hispanic. So this is an ongoing thing that the Presbyterian Church is doing. And as a Latino Hispanic that serves a church that is not his own, meaning 99% white, I have cause for concern. So I'm asking, is your ministry area considering Latino Hispanic challenges?
All right, thank you so much for that question. So I forget, I'm getting my presentations mixed up, but when I asked, are you calling for something? I was thinking about what I said with the group yesterday where we met, and we talked about what CARICOM, the Caribbean community, says about reparations, which is they say oppressed communities, and I'm paraphrasing, and their descendants have the duty to call for repair and reparation. And so when I say that we practice a call and response repair ethic, it means that we're not about representation. That's not what reparation is about. The other issues that you mentioned are issues that I have also noticed. And so I affirm what you have noticed. But when we say a call and repair response ethic, it means that when people say there's a problem, it needs to be repaired, then that relationship with the Center for Repair begins. I am aware of all kinds of inequities that the PCUSA has been engaged in with multiple groups, and I don't determine for any other group who has not already called for repair what they might call for. However, some things are in the mix and underway. I've got some trips planned, and I live in Puerto Rico, and so I'm aware of some of the challenges, for example, that Puerto Ricans experience as a colony by another name of the United States. And there's a colonial history that requires some repair that involves a wide range of activities that have some kind of COINTELPRO-ish like vibes to them. I'll put it that way. So I do have some plans underway. I'm working with individuals in our mission world family like Valdir Franca to really come to an understanding of what repair and reparation might mean for people who may or may not refer to themselves as Hispanics and Latinx people and others. But it's been made very clear to me that I have to listen to what people are calling for and not rope other people into repair and reparation, because what makes sense and what is being called for by Afro-Americans and indigenous nations, I've been constantly said that's not us. And so, well, my email is not there anymore, but let's be in touch, because when you call for something, the process begins. But I don't invent for myself, oh, this is what the center needs to do for people according to my understanding. But let's be in touch.
Thank you, Your Grace.
Well, I don't know which name is my first.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I've studied a lot of the history in this, and I appreciate the additions you've given today. But I guess I have to shift into another area and look at where we're going in the future for the denomination. This denomination, and we're experiencing it here in Central Presbytery, is bleeding membership. And we're seeing it on the financial side, we're seeing on the membership side, and everything of that nature. Common sense would say that Presbytery has been looking at some analysis and prioritizing what they think the issues are towards losing membership. And my question is, from that prioritization, has the Presbytery concluded that racism is such a high priority that it's impacting the membership and driving it down for this program? And or do they conclude that this will be a key towards increasing membership?
So very, very briefly, and thank you for giving us a little bit more space. I do not believe that the Presbyterian Church has drawn the conclusion that racial justice is a membership drive success strategy. Some people may have thought once upon a time that doing the next new trendy thing is going to kind of signal relevance and bring a bunch of people in. I've noticed that many people think the opposite is the case with some reason. Instead, the Center for Repair exists because Presbyterians have been persistent, and there has become a groundswell for people to realize that we have to do the right thing because we have to do the right thing. And I have noticed, thank you. It's good theology, and there's an enormous amount of wealth in the Presbyterian Church that has been derived in part by exploiting people across generations and across the entire world. And good Reformed people understand that whether it's popular or not, something has to be done. Although I've been getting people who aren't Presbyterian, I've been getting emails from people who aren't Presbyterian saying, I didn't know that Presbyterians were doing anything like this. Is there a Presbyterian church that I can come visit? I've even heard in Juneau, Alaska, people who haven't set foot in a church in a really long time have been showing up to Bible study, trying to figure out what's this thing again called Christianity and how can it help us understand what we need to do. So I do think if you want to think in church growth strategy terms, there's an angle. And there's some evidence that some people are noticing that the Presbyterian Church is finally acknowledging what everybody has already known for a long time. But no, I don't think that anyone has calculated that this is going to be good for business per se. Although I'd be surprised if somebody wasn't thinking along those lines, because someone usually is. But again, thank you all for your attention, and thank you all for being good sports. This is not an easy topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.